We took a week's hiatus, but we are back, charged up, and ready to roll. We got Matt Simic on the line as always here on our USC live show right here at the Voice of College Football. We appreciate you all stopping by. Please get settled, hit the like button, and leave your comments and questions there in the live chat. And you know what? It's this early in the show. Go out there and grab a couple friends to enjoy the next 60 minutes or so with Matt and myself. Matt, how you doing tonight?
Doing good, and it's great to be back with you on the show.
Absolutely. So Matt and I took a week off, although for Matt, it certainly wasn't a week off, but there was a week off here from the USC show. We just thought it was a good time to stop down, and Matt had all sorts of other responsibilities with the Australian Open.
That's right.
In particular.
Catching up on sleep after the last two very late nights. Yes.
Oh, yes. I know by extension of covering, not necessarily as a journalist, but being responsible for a number of operations there at the worldwide leader during the Aussie Open. Wow. Yes, those can be some late nights.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I used to live in the Pacific time zone in Seattle. Now I'm in Arizona. So, you're up at the matches start at 1:40 instead of 12:40. On the West Coast, you can kind of power through when it's at 12:40 a.m., but at 1:40, ooh, just middle of the night, but survived and ready to talk some Pac-12 football scheduling because the release came out the week before last Monday. So we never got around to it. Let's have at it.
All right. So we actually just finished up on the various ACC channels a look at the ACC schedules that were released tonight. So check out our live version on the number of ACC channels that we have as we took that on for a couple hours. And now we'll look at USC and the rest of the Pac-12. So let me pop it up on the screen here, and we will get started with what I find to be a very intriguing, not necessarily matchup, Matt, as much as just the timing of the game and looking at this week 0, because most of the big brands and the big powers don't get involved in week 0. But this year, Notre Dame's got a game against Navy in week 0. And here we see USC at the Coliseum taking on San Jose State, team coming off a 7-5 campaign.
Yeah, so, this is the definition of a backloaded schedule. Like the front is, cream puff cupcake city. And so like you can pretty much pencil in USC as being 6-0 through 6 games, but it's those second 6 games. And so I think the good part of this is that, people have the pitchforks out for Alex Grinch at USC. Well, he gets a nice little run up before all the big games. Like, these first several games, certainly like through Arizona State, like, should not be too much of a problem. So if you have issues, if you have difficulties getting guys integrated in the lineup, getting guys to be at their best, developing players, Corey Foreman, cough. So those first few games offer a little buffer before things get really serious. So like, I think if you're a USC fan, you're not liking the schedule, but like, I think that is the silver lining to find in the schedule, is that the defense doesn't have to be anywhere near its best right away. You have games that you can take care of no matter what, before things get really intense with Notre Dame on October 14th. So that is the silver lining there. But on balance, it's a really atrocious schedule for USC. Like if you were to devise a schedule and say, hey, what's a schedule that puts USC in the best position to succeed, to get to the 4-team college football playoff before we go to 12 in 2024, this is not it. You would not have aligned the schedule like this if you were going to say, how do we put USC in the best possible position to succeed?
San Jose State is a team, as I mentioned, that's coming off a 7-5 campaign. They lost to Eastern Michigan in the famous Idaho Potato Bowl by a couple touchdowns, and they played one Power 5 opponent in taking on Auburn down in the Plains, lost that game by a touchdown. Now, Nevada despite having a pretty successful run of 10 or 15 years for the most part, is now one of the more atrocious teams, at least coming off that 2022 campaign. So that should be an easy touch. Matt, I meant to ask you as we unveil the start of the Pac 12 stretch there with a September 9th game, and just very strange that a third game of the season is already going to be in the books on September 9th. But with Stanford coming to the Coliseum, do you know, and I wouldn't hold you to it, but at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if you knew the origins of why USC and Stanford always play so early in the conference season.
I have to admit, I don't know the particular answer to that. But just that particular fact, that particular
Yeah,
part of the history evades me.
been going on for quite some time. Then the bye week, then a trip to Arizona State to take on Kenny Dillingham and the Sun Devils, of course, coming off a disappointing 3-9 season, but Dillingham, the youngest of the coaching hires and coaches, head coaches in the country, I believe, at 32 years old. And speaking of which, the very next week, another intriguing coaching hire in the Pac 12 with Coach Prime. And what is turned out to be an influx of all sorts of talent, both through the recruiting ranks and the transfer portal coming to Boulder as USC goes to Colorado. So, not necessarily from the standpoint of the competitive nature of the game, we shall see once they get on the field. But if nothing else, a lot of storylines there early in the Pac 12 season.
Yeah, on our UCLA Oregon football preview podcast, we previewed that game as well as a USC game, and we brought on Tony Siracusa, also the editor of DucksWire, Zach Neal, to talk about the game. We had a 4-way conversation. So Zach Neal's been on the Voice of College Football before. Zach Neal told me in Twitter DMs, he said, and also in his coverage at DucksWire, he said, this is the Pac-12 making sure that Coach Prime, Deion Sanders, plays the marquee names in the Pac-12 before the shine wears off. Before Colorado takes on too much water, you want to get Colorado against those elite programs early in the season while the TV intrigue is at a maximum height. Like, you don't want a 5-loss Colorado playing Oregon or USC. You're not going to get the same TV bump that you will when you have them playing early in the season. So Colorado plays Oregon September 23rd, USC September 30. That's a very TV conscious move by the Pac-12, as Zach Neal of DucksWire pointed out to me. That's a particularly interesting storyline there.
And in addition to the conference approach, it's interesting to note that Colorado's got two fairly high weight, high leverage games outside the conference, taking on TCU, of course, just made a run to the national championship game, and taking on a Nebraska team that has been down forever. However, with a new head coach in Matt Rule and always a rabid fan base, I don't recall where those games are being. Well, they took on TCU at home last year.
Yeah, so
they're going to
TCU.
Dallas Fort Worth. Yeah. I don't recall where the Nebraska game is.
I'm not sure about that one. Yeah,
I'll check on that. But again, Colorado bulking up with a couple of difficult non-conference matchups, as they have the last few years, taking on the likes of Minnesota and Air Force and TCU the last few years. So again, Colorado with some interesting non-conference games that won't necessarily, I'm not making a prediction here, but won't necessarily be the most competitive games, but have an allure and will have a lot of buzz around them.
Absolutely. No, I mean, Deion Sanders going against Nebraska and Matt Rule, like just the coaching matchup there, that is extremely attractive, even if the game might not be, even if the teams might be a mess and getting trying to get organized and find their sea legs early in the season. But just Deion against Matt Rule, like, wow, like I'm certainly going to take a look at that game if I have a chance. If it's going up against the USC game, different story. But like, if there's any chance to watch that game, like, I'm certainly going to take a peek. And of course, the stature of that Nebraska-Colorado rivalry for, a good 15 years, like, it took the baton from Nebraska, Oklahoma as the Big 8, then Big 12 rivalry. So, the storylines are intriguing. We'll see about the games, but the storylines are certainly very intriguing surrounding Colorado.
And then as we dip into October, of course, USC is paid a visit by Arizona, and the Wildcats gave USC fits last season and should be looking to get even better. And Jed Fish doing a nice job, at least through those first two seasons, in lifting Arizona to a competitive status here in 2022.
Yeah, so this is where we get into the meat of the schedule, and this is where we get into the reality of just how bad a schedule this is for USC. So, if you asked a USC fan, any USC football fan, what's the one thing we wanted on the 2023 schedule? The one thing, because you already knew, like the schedule leak had come out in advance that you had Washington on November 4th and you had Oregon on November 11th. The one thing you wanted, the only thing, was don't give us a high-end opponent, which frankly meant Utah, either the week before or the week after Notre Dame. That was it. Like that was the one thing USC fans, players, coaches, administrators wanted, and they didn't get it. And so like that to me felt like the Pac-12 flipping the bird. And I've had people tell me, well, but if you put other games in other places, that would have imbalanced the schedule, the rotations wouldn't have worked. Phooey. Let's educate people on a specific point about recent Pac-12 scheduling. USC and Utah, the Sam Darnold game, when Clay Helton called upon Sam Darnold after Max Brown got off to the slow start. Sam Darnold played well in Salt Lake City, didn't quite win. Utes won that game. It was on a Friday night, too. Another Larry Scott special. But like that was the start of the legend of Sam Darnold rescuing Clay Helton in 2016 at USC. That was a September game. Okay. 2019, JT Daniels is hurt. Keaton Slovis steps in, and he gets hurt in the first quarter, and third-string quarterback Matt Fink leads USC to a stunning win over a Utah team, which eventually still made the Pac-12 championship game as the Pac-12 South Division winner. When was that game played? In 2019, September. All right, so USC and Utah have a recent history of playing games, plural, multiple times, for you trying to do the quick math at home here at the Voice of College Football. USC and Utah have played multiple times in September in recent years. So any talk about, well, this disrupts the normal schedule and this adjusts the framework, and no, we couldn't have put USC and Utah in September. That would have disrupted things. Au contraire, like there is just tangible evidence of the Pac-12 repeatedly, multiple times, putting USC and Utah in September. Now, look, you want to make the TV matchup sexy in the second half of the season. I get it. But again, USC wanted one thing. Don't put Utah right before or right after Notre Dame. Could have played on September 23rd as kind of like the sexy early season matchup. The SEC will give us Florida and Tennessee in September. Like that was the sexy early season SEC game. So the idea that like, oh, you can't play a high end conference game in September, that's also BS. All right. So knowing how crowded that schedule was going to be with Notre Dame in mid-October in South Bend, because you have to do that schedule rotation every odd year. And because you had Washington, Oregon with the backloaded November, you could have just put USC and Utah in September so that it wasn't brushing right up against Notre Dame, but the Pac-12 didn't do it. And we can just sit here and pretend and be naive and say, oh, well, that's just how the dominoes fell. That's just how the system and the rotations worked. Or we can say, yeah, George Kliavkoff and Merton Hanks, they flipped USC the bird on the way out the door. And, because Merton Hanks said, he told John Wilner, of the Wilner Hotline, foremost Pac-12 journalist, as everybody knows. Merton Hanks told John Wilner, basically, we're delaying the Pac-12 schedule. We're not putting out in December as we've done in the past. We're going to wait until mid-January because we want to get this right. We want to get this thing balanced and fair for everyone. Well, we know that was just a load of BS. And you know what? Like, it's not even a villainous or despicable act by the Pac-12. Like, okay, Like, it's good politics to cater to Oregon, make sure that Phil Knight's happy because he is a very important constituent now with USC and UCLA headed out. Like, I get it. Like, it's smart. All right. It's smart to cater to Oregon and not to USC because USC is not going to be your concern. What's USC going to do? Call the police? Like, USC just has to sit here and take it in 2023. So, like, politically, it's actually astute on the part of the Pac-12. But my thing is, people are saying, oh, anti-USC animus didn't have anything to do with this. USC departing for the Big Ten didn't have anything to do with this. Come on. Let's be adults. Let's be grown-ups. We live in the real world. Like, human beings are motivated by incentives. Let us not pretend that the politics and the economics didn't have something to do with all this. That's the thing. Like, you can say that, USC maybe, USC fans shouldn't be whining about this because, you left for the Big Ten, so you brought this on yourselves. I'm fine with that. Like, I would agree. Okay. But I really do get angry with people who say that politics and economics, didn't really motivate or guide these kinds of decisions. Now that is just unserious. That is just unrealistic. So when we look at all this, let's point out at the schedule as you have it on the screen. So Utah and USC on the 21st, and then Utah and Oregon play the next week, the 28th. And Oregon has a pretty soft game. I'm not sure which one it is. I think it's either Washington State or Cal on the 21st, and then Oregon gets the Utah game. So, like, you will notice with Oregon's schedule, when you compare it to what you see on the screen with USC's schedule, Oregon has soft game, tough game, soft game, tough game. There are buffers before each of the big games on Oregon's schedule. Oregon has an off week on October 7 before playing Washington in Seattle on October 14th. There's always a buffer for each of Oregon's games. So this schedule is tailored to help Oregon succeed. It's scheduled to give Oregon the best possible chance. And again, for people who think that this is just knee-jerk pro-USC fanboy whining, let me say, last year, George Kliavkoff catered to USC. Like, last year's schedule was pretty much laid out like a red carpet meant to help USC succeed because USC hadn't bolted for the Big Ten yet, and USC football was the most important brand that the Pac-12 had to take care of. All right? So, like, I'm not going to sit here and ignore or pretend that USC wasn't given this same red carpet treatment last year that Oregon's getting this year. I'm not pretending to ignore that, okay? I'm not pretending it doesn't exist. So USC was given the royal treatment last year, Oregon this year. And what changed? USC left for the Big Ten. Like, this is not that complicated. And we shouldn't have to sit here and pretend that the politics and the economics didn't motivate these decisions. So with USC, you have Notre Dame, Utah, the one buffer, Cal, and then Washington, Oregon, UCLA. So, like, you're playing 5 high-end games, at least 4. You're playing Notre Dame, Utah, Washington, Oregon in a 5-week stretch without any rest. That is a unique gauntlet that no other team in the Pac-12 is facing. And this leads me to the other really, really big talking point, especially from Utah fans. Utah fans have gotten really salty, really spicy in my mentions at Trojans Wire when I berated this schedule release and how ridiculous it was for USC. Utah fans have been particularly vocal, even more than Oregon. It's kind of interesting how it works that way. Utah fans were particularly vocal in saying, oh, but you get that off week in late November before the Pac-12 championship game. That's a unique advantage for USC. Hold up. USC plays its full 12-game regular season schedule before that off week. So it's only an off week if USC gets to the Pac-12 championship game. If USC doesn't get to the Pac-12 championship game, that's not an off week. That's just the end of the season. All right. So this is an unrealized benefit. One Utah fan in my mentions was mature enough and honest enough to say that it's a currently unrealized benefit. USC will derive benefit from that off week late in November if it makes the Pac-12 championship game. And I know the roots of this off week in late November too. It was BYU backing out of a game, because of the move to the Big 12. Look, I get it. So I'm not criticizing the Pac-12 for having that off week in late November. That was unavoidable. The avoidable error was you could have had USC and Utah playing in September. But in terms of that late November off week, it's going to be really hard for USC to get to the Pac-12 championship game. Now, of course, this is a big boy league and it's a big boy circumstance, and Alex Grinch has to get that defense ready. So, from that standpoint, no excuses. But, just in terms of giving USC more buffers in the middle of the year, that like USC didn't get that. And you add on the fact that from week 4 through week 12, that's 9 straight weeks of football, USC is going to be playing. So like this team, that the depth is going to be tested when we get into early November, and you'll have been playing 6-7 straight weeks. That is a burden that no other Pac-12 team has to carry. UCLA is playing 8 straight weeks at one point in the season. But Oregon and Washington, the 2 most important constituents for George Kliavkoff, now that USC and UCLA are on the door, they get that nice off week in early October, pretty much in the midpoint of the season. That's exactly when any football team wants its off week. You get a nice balance between the first half of the season and the second half of the season. The off week isn't too early that you're then playing a lot of weeks consecutively, which is what USC has. And it's not too late, that you can't really capitalize on an off week because you're having to play so many weeks consecutively before that off week. So the idea that USC has this great advantage by having the off week in late November, it's not true. So USC has to get to the Pac-12 title game to derive benefit from that. And it's going to be really hard for USC to get there just because like the depth of this team. If the injury bug hits early to mid-October, especially when you go through that really physical 2-game double stack against Notre Dame and Utah back-to-back weeks, those 2 teams are going to grind on USC. Even if the Trojans win both games, it's going to take a physical toll. And then you have to go play Washington, Oregon in November. If this team doesn't get to the Pac-12 championship game, all the people who are saying, oh, this is such a great advantage, that's just not going to add up. So it's kind of like saying, hey, we're going to give you a 1-year free membership at a health club. But first, we mandate, before you sign on the dotted line, we mandate that you have to eat 20 cheeseburgers in an hour. That's basically what this amounts to. Like, oh, if you get to the Pac-12 title game, you have it made. But good luck getting to Vegas with this schedule. We're going to make it as hard for you as is humanly possible. So that's a little perspective on the late November off week.
So, Matt, I am 90% on board with your take. So let's all understand what the Pac-12 schedule format is. Even though the championship game has been altered to a 1 versus 2 matchup and not a division champion versus division champion format, the format of games scheduled is the same. You play everyone in your division, and the 2 games the 2 teams that USC misses are Washington State and Oregon State. Those are the 2 teams that USC does not play. So this is the one slight disclaimer I will make, is that USC's schedule could be more difficult having played, let's say, in Oregon State. I don't know if there is some kind of rotation.
It is part of a rotation. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically,
like it wasn't optional.
Okay.
Much as USC didn't play Oregon and Washington the last 2 years because it was just part of the rotation.
Okay. So basically the teams that we see here are mandated by the rotation that's already been in place. Okay. Yeah. So to further Matt's point, basically looking at USC's early season Pac-12 schedule with Stanford, Colorado, and what was the other one? There was somebody else in there. Arizona State. You basically can't make their final 6 games any more difficult. Whether it's going to be Cal or Stanford or Colorado, it's Cal. It's Cal on the road, and we'll see if they're a better football team, but they certainly weren't this past season. So basically, the final 6 games are as difficult as can be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in the fact that you're taking them on in, double stacks, Notre Dame, Utah, double stack, back-to-back weeks, Washington, Oregon, double stack, back-to-back weeks. That's what makes it extra difficult. All right. So I've been negative Nancy for quite a while here on this show at the Voice of College Football. Let's offer the positive spin from this. And that is that if USC beat here, so last year, what did I say what the key game was? It was the Oregon State game in week 4 in Corvallis. You get through that game, and then the rest of the schedule, really set up well for the Trojans, and they did indeed get to the Pac-12 championship game. So in terms of like just their conference goal, the Oregon State game, I think, my analysis held up pretty well. That was the hinge point game, and USC survived that. It got to the Pac-12 title game. So this year's pick for the most important game on the schedule, Utah. It's clearly Utah because either way, either USC wins at Notre Dame or USC loses. You're coming off that game, and there's just so much importance in either scenario. And the more specific point to make about Utah and why I think it's the most important game on the schedule is that, and this is just a Pac-12 angle, it's not a college football playoff angle, because Notre Dame is really going to set the tone for the playoff debate. Like in terms of the playoff, Notre Dame is the most important game, but in terms of winning the Pac-12, which is really the main goal from this season, for this 2023 season, given how difficult the schedule is, if you beat Utah, what that very likely means is if you can then just split that Washington-Oregon double stack, and then you got UCLA at the Coliseum on the 18th before you finally can, take a week off and hit the sauna or a beach and have a beer. If you win that game against Utah, you just likely need to split Washington, Oregon to make the Pac-12 championship game, right? Because, assuming that you don't stumble, you don't step on a rake in those early games against the Arizona schools and Colorado, and then of course you take care of Cal on October 28th. It's really going to come down to going 2-1 against the 3-team axis of evil: Utah, Washington, Oregon. If USC goes 2-1 against those 3 teams, very hard to imagine USC not making the Pac-12 championship game. So, and if you make the Pac-12 title game, then you actualize the benefit of that late November off week. And you don't have what we had in 2022 with USC having to play at UCLA, draining game, Notre Dame, draining game, and then having to go right into a rematch against a physical Utah team, while Utah had like a quasi off week, playing a 1-win Colorado team. Like that mattered. That certainly mattered, in terms of the Pac-12 championship game. So if USC gets to Vegas, then that late November off week becomes pure gold for Lincoln Riley and Alex Grinch. They get 2 weeks to study film on whichever opponent they might have. They can look at all the football games, watch them on television from their couches on November 25th, and you get the benefit of that. So again, if you beat Utah, then you just have to split that Washington-Oregon pair to make Las Vegas, to make the Pac-12 championship game. I mean, UCLA, maybe not a layup, but you don't have DTR, and it's in the Coliseum. You're getting a home crowd, a full home crowd for that game. If USC gets to the UCLA game with, we win, we're in the Pac-12 title game, well, I don't see USC losing that one to USC's current group of personnel. It's all about going 2-1 against the 3 best challengers in the conference. And it really, if you beat Utah, the odds of being 2-1 in that trio of huge games in the Pac-12, the odds go way up. And if you lose, the odds go way down. So it's really Utah, Utah, Utah. That is the 2023 version of 2022 Oregon State, Oregon State, Oregon State. Utah is the game USC cannot afford to lose in 2023.
Thanks for being here, everyone, for our weekly USC show right here at the Voice of College Football. Please subscribe to the channel And hit that bell for the notifications to know when we go live. Matt and I are dedicated to this Monday time slot at 8 Pacific time, but at the same time, we do have changing schedules at times, and therefore we may need to move the show from time to time. So if you subscribe and hit the bell for the notifications, you do know when we go live. Tim has made a comment here. We appreciate the super chat. Tim, Notre Dame game moved to the first 3 games for Big Ten schedule. So looking ahead to 2024, it will be intriguing to see what is done with the Notre Dame October in South Bend, late November at the LA Coliseum rotation.
It's fascinating to contemplate if that changes. I mean, it's tradition. I think fans at these schools, they know and appreciate tradition. So, boy, I don't think that would go down well. Even though, if USC is going to South Bend in September, like it's not a cold weather game, that might actually help USC. But boy, I think fans are pretty happy with just going to South Bend in mid-October when you get, the autumn in full color. And then in the even numbered years, you have the Thanksgiving weekend game. It strikes me as a thing where, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But maybe the whole point of the game being moved up is that you don't get into a situation where USC has to play a really good Big Ten team and Notre Dame in back-to-back weeks like that. So that might be the philosophy, kind of what we have here with Notre Dame and Utah in back-to-back weeks, that the TV networks, they want to have the bigger games later in the season. So there could be benefits actually. See, this is a counterintuitive thing here, because moving the game into September would seem to favor USC on a number of levels. It's not a cold weather game. You get Notre Dame before its offense really can crank up. Notre Dame having several weeks of play and being able to kind of adjust, because Notre Dame teams generally, this is not even a coach specific thing. It's not particular to Marcus Freeman, but just Notre Dame doesn't play the style of football that Lincoln Riley does. If you can unleash that Lincoln Riley offense on Notre Dame early in the season, before the gears have kind of turned, and that Irish defense has a rhythm and continuity playing together. I mean, the more I think about it, the more I think that USC would have a lot to gain from this. But I'm not going to sit there and say, oh, because USC has things to gain, the game should be moved to early September. Because I am a college football traditionalist, I'd like to see things stay where they are. Okay, Tim Frank, you want to catch the Cubs. The Cubs suck. So we can just kind of minimize that little talking point there.
I don't know if Tim has ever been to Wrigley. I know that regardless of how much the Cubs may suck right now, I've never made that trip. So I would want to, catch the Cubs as well. That would be kind of cool. It will be fascinating, the move to the Big Ten, but for right now, yes, I don't think there's any question that what Matt has laid out, even though there have been certainly support in the chat for Matt's perspective, there's been a few people that have said, it's not that bad. But it's as bad as the Pac-12 can possibly make it.
That's the thing, right? That if you're looking at a schedule, how does it line up? And it's not the teams. Like, we all knew USC was going to have to play Oregon, was going to have to play Washington, was going to have to play Utah. So the teams are not at issue here. We knew the teams. All right. It's the alignment, and do you get an off week, or do you get a softer opponent the week before or the week after? Big games on your schedule. There's nothing for USC. I mean, you could say technically, okay, Cal is in between Utah and Washington, but that's only a brief interruption of a 4-game and 5-week gauntlet against Notre Dame, Utah, Oregon, Washington. All right, technically it could have been tougher, but so you could have been Notre Dame, Utah, Washington, and Oregon in 4 straight weeks. Technically, but realistically, a 4 and 5 where you're playing 4 elite opponents in 5 weeks with no rest breaks, that realistically, not technically, but realistically, that is as tough as a schedule can be. So that's really the thing. It's all about, the alignment of certain elements. And again, I go back to Oregon's schedule. Look at Oregon's schedule, folks. Get an off week before playing Washington. Get at Washington State before playing Utah, and Utah's playing USC the week before that game. So like Oregon is definitely better situated than Utah is for that October 28th game in Salt Lake City. Okay, thank you, Mark. So yeah, let's just go here with the Oregon schedule. So it's also backloaded the way USC's schedule is backloaded. That is a point of commonality, but you get the buffer before the big game. So yeah, the off week, then Washington. You get Washington State at home before you go to Utah. You have Cal before you play USC. So again, it's soft week, tough week, soft week, tough week. It's layered, it's balanced so that Oregon can take a little bit of a breather, doesn't have to be at its very best all the time. USC, 4 elite teams in 5 weeks. It's a totally different schedule alignment. And again, like I don't blame George Kliavkoff for doing this. Like he needs to make Phil Knight happy. Like everyone here would agree, George Kliavkoff needs to make Phil Knight happy. Like that should go without saying. And he did. All right. So just as he tried to keep USC happy last year, wasn't good enough, but like Kliavkoff made the effort. He also did the conference championship game formatting reform, to make sure that the odds of USC making the Pac-12 title game were better than they were if it was the old divisional format. And of course, we had USC and Utah, 2 teams from the old Pac-12 South, playing in that conference championship game. So, like, just the political and economic incentives, they were motivators here. I just, want to stress, let's just not pretend those incentives didn't exist. That really is the main thing when you compare USC's and Oregon's schedules.
I don't know if Connor Johnson is doing this for my benefit or to stir up things in the chat. I can't in any way forecast the Pac-12 being the best conference in college football and breaking up like a 15-year streak from the SEC.
Well, Connor, let's tackle that. I mean, I do think that the Pac-12 is going to have a really special season. Like right now, I can sit here and say, yeah, like we're going to have some 41-38 type thrillers. We're going to get several of those, whether it's Washington versus Utah or USC versus Oregon. There are just so many good games. There are 4 or 5 really good teams. I include, Connor, your Oregon State Beavers in that group. There's so many games that are just going to spill out and be just spectacular athletic festivals with elite quarterback play, veteran quarterbacks, veteran skill players coming back for another year. The Pac-12 is set up to have some great games. Now the important cautionary note is that while we're going to have great games, this is not a Pac-12 conducive to getting into the college football playoff. Like it's going to be hard for teams to go 12-1 against this schedule. It's going to even for Oregon with kind of the buffers between tough games. It's still going to be hard for the Ducks to go 12-1. Like they have to go to Seattle, they have to host USC, they have to go to Salt Lake City. So like the Oregon has to win 2 of those 3 games to be on course for 12-1, and then of course it'll need to win the Pac-12 championship game. So like the Pac-12 is going to have several really good teams. I think that's the point of agreement we can make. But in terms of getting to the college football playoff, that's something I can't really be very confident about. And of course, that includes USC. And this is where USC's schedule really matters, because if USC, if we lived in an alternate world where USC was playing Utah in September and had a cushy game after Notre Dame, and before the Washington Oregon double stack, I would be singing a different song, about USC's college football playoff prospects. But this schedule is, looking just the mechanics and the framework of this schedule, it's not built to put USC in a 4-team playoff. And that's part of why the 12-team playoff is such a good thing, that when the nuances of a schedule work against you, like, last year I said USC was going to go 10-2. And, I actually underestimated Lincoln Riley by a game. USC went 11-1 in the 12 normal game schedule. This year, and I'd be interested to see what folks think about this on the Voice of College Football. But if USC goes 10-2 against this schedule, that's really not bad. I mean, obviously USC fans so badly want to get to the college football playoff, and that is the expectation. That is the standard for Lincoln Riley to meet. But given this particular schedule setup, if USC goes 10-2, that's a lot of heavy lifting, because it will mean that USC will have won at least 2 of the 4 games at Notre Dame, home Utah, home Washington, at Oregon. I mean, splitting those 4 games is no joke. I mean, and it would be amazing if USC went 3-1 against those 4 teams. With this defense and the condition it's in, USC going 3-1 against those 4 teams, part of an 11-1 regular season, like, that would be phenomenal. That would be absolutely amazing. And I think a lot of the USC realists, I know that they're not the loudest voices in the crowd, because it's always easy to be loudest when things fall apart, as they did in the Pac-12 title game, and especially against Tulane in the Cotton Bowl. But there are plenty of USC realists who, when Lincoln Riley came aboard, they were saying, hey, Lincoln Riley, great coach, absolutely amazing play caller. It's still going to take 3 years to really get the depth, to really get the bodies, to really get, everything turned around from Clay Helton. It's not going to be an absolutely instant fix. And, that has been one of the tension points among the USC fan base, that there were some people who felt, we can get this done in year 1, not necessarily in terms of the playoff, but in terms of winning the Pac-12. And, I think both sides really came out of this looking, fairly wise. I don't think one side conclusively won the argument, because USC did overachieve relative to national projections. But on the other hand, those last 2 games really offered a sobering reminder of how USC simply did not have the dudes, the bodies, the depth on defense. And we can say that Alex Grinch didn't coach him up as well as he could have, but we know that he did not have filet mignon. He had sloppy Joe. He did not have the premium choice cuts available. Bill Parcells always talked about, who does the cooking and who gets the groceries. Well, so the groceries weren't at the level needed for USC to serve a first-class defense to the opposition. So from that standpoint, the idea that this was going to take more than a little while, it was going to take more than just 1 year in terms of getting up to the playoff standard, that particular argument seems pretty on point. It seems to have held up fairly well. So if USC goes 10-2 and makes the Pac-12 championship game, but misses the college football playoff, we all wanted the playoff in year 2, and I'll admit, I've said, like, playoff in year 2 was really the expectation, that not year 1 but year 2. Well, I'm going to have to, I'm not completely walking back that statement, but I will say this schedule makes me think that if USC can just get a Pac-12 championship from this 2023 season, 10-2 through the 12 games, and then you get the off week in late November and you win the Pac-12 title game and you go to a different New Year's Six Bowl, given this schedule and given just everything we know about the program, I'm not going to say that's a great season, because a great season means going to the college football playoff, but it will be a good season. And unless we see more defensive reinforcements in the transfer portal, to just talking about this roster, I'm prepared to accept an 11-2 Pac-12 championship winning season in 2023 based on the difficulty of the schedule.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And anytime winning a conference championship and finishing in the top 10 in the country is, I know that there's a few schools out there that's not good enough on an annual basis, but considering where USC is coming from, it's certainly, even if Lincoln Riley reaches the heights, that should be an acceptable season, even in year 7 or 8, if there are playoff seasons around it. You're not going to go to well, obviously we're going to be in a 12-team format at that point anyway, and in a different conference. But if there was a 4-team playoff, nobody's making the playoffs every year. I will say, Connor, that the Pac-12 is not the best conference in college football, and it's most likely, in my estimation, not the second best conference in college football. It may be. We shall see them play out the games. I am going to estimate that it's going to be probably the third best conference in college football, as it was this past season.
Yeah, I think a couple talking points here. One is I think the two teams that are going to affect the two non Pac-12 teams that are going to affect the how the conference power balance is, how the state of play in terms of national college football is in 2023 in terms of the conferences, Florida State and Wisconsin. Those strike me as the two teams which are really going to have a significant effect on how we rate the strength of conferences and the balance there. Because you look at what Luke Fickell has done in the offseason, getting Phil Longo as offensive coordinator. So like Wisconsin's leaving the Barry Alvarez, Brett Bielema Stone Age. It's going to be modernized offense at Wisconsin. So just that right there is a commitment to, the forward pass, which we haven't seen, in the past for most of the past 30 years. Now you did have Russell Wilson flinging the ball around the yard a little bit, but for the most part, you've had, those Scott Tolzien, Darrell Bevel, those ball control game manager quarterbacks, Jack Cohn as well,
Sure.
So now at Wisconsin's entering a whole new era, and Fickell, we he's an elite coach. And Wisconsin getting him, like, that was a real coup. Say what you want about Jim Leonard, but like if Fickell was there, Fickell wanted to come, Wisconsin indubitably made the right hire there. So Wisconsin really could instantly push the Big Ten back up if you have that, along with Harbaugh and Ohio State, also in the conference. And then you go to all right, Mark, you wanted to say something. So before I go to Florida State, you want to jump in?
Well, I was going to say that Wisconsin doing what Wisconsin has done with those pedestrian type quarterbacks over the last 15 or 20 years has certainly served it well. Had they been the the banner, the flag what term am I looking for? The flag bearer of the conference over the last 15 years, that would be a different deal. But when they're typically sitting in like the fourth spot of the conference and finishing in the top 15 in the country, they've been just fine.
Yeah, I mean they really slipped the past few years, but yeah, I mean they were like the 10-3 program that made a second tier bowl game below the top tier. But so the fact that Wisconsin wasn't at the place it's normally been, the fact that Graham Mertz, he got Paul Chryst fired and he prevented Jim Leonard from getting the permanent job, like that was an impressive coach killer season from a quarterback in 2022. So that's Wisconsin in the Big Ten picture. So then Florida State is really, I think, the most interesting team in all of college football. But that program is really going to have such an effect on how we view the ACC in 2023. Do we get back to the days when Clemson, Florida State, two powers meeting on the mountaintop, was a must-see annual event in college football? When there was a little window when we had Jimbo and Dabo going at it, and it was must-see TV. It was appointment television, heavyweight games. It didn't last for a very long time, but in that small window we had, that was such a compelling clash at the top of the ACC, and it made the other programs in the conference do better. It's kind of like Federer and Nadal, or Nadal and Djokovic, forcing the rest of the ATP men's tennis tour to be better. So, it's been Clemson and a bunch of dwarfs for the last several years, for the most part. Obviously, the last 2021 when Clemson slipped and you had Pitt and Wake getting in there. But, most of the time, of course, it's just been Clemson's world alone there on the summit. And Clemson drummed North Carolina in the ACC title game. So 2022 felt a lot like, the 2015 through 2020. But so can Florida State join Clemson and give the ACC two elite teams and, create kind of an upward flow, an upward gravitational pull in that conference. So Wisconsin in the Big Ten, Florida State in the ACC, those are two very central case studies and teams to point to in terms of, when we evaluate the conference power structure in college football. Those are two teams that are going to really have a significant effect on the conversation and how it flows during the 2023 season.
So Tim makes a comment here and says, let's face it, the Big Ten and the Pac-12 did not have any great out-of-conference wins. Okay, I'll make this statement. Penn State is a 3 seed in the Big Ten, defeating the Pac-12 champion pretty handily in the Rose Bowl. That game was 35-14 in the fourth quarter, is a pretty substantial win over a top 10 team that won a conference. And I know Ohio State didn't make a 50-yard field goal at the gun, but if you're just evaluating teams, I think they pretty much proved on that day, in my eyes, that they're the second best team in the country in 2022.
Yeah, you could make a compelling case. You could certainly make a compelling case for that argument. So, yeah, in terms of how we turn the page to 2023, it's going to be fascinating to see what kind of carryover we have and which teams sustain and which teams don't. That's going to be quite the significant plot point.
All right. Did you get a chance to review the other Pac-12 schedules? Did anything else stand out to you?
Yeah. So if I'm a Utah fan, I'm grumbling about this schedule. I didn't bolt to the Big Ten. And yet I really got the short end of the stick with Utah. The biggest gripe in my mind, well, two big gripes. One is something that we've already covered, and that is that Utah has to play USC and Oregon back-to-back, October 21 and October 28. So, and Oregon hosts Washington State the week before that Utah game. So Utah is put in a position to fail. Utah was not done any favors by the Pac-12 schedule with that USC Oregon double stack in late October. But then you also notice on the screen here at the Voice of College Football, the Friday night game at Oregon State. This is how you treat your two-time defending conference champion. This is where we go back to Larry Scott. Larry Scott, and it's the famous example, or infamous, I should say, USC playing the big primetime game in mid-September against Texas, that epic game that went into overtime. USC had to then go to Pullman on a Friday night the very next week and lost, just a classic set up to fail situation. It would never happen to Alabama or Georgia in the SEC. It would never happen to Ohio State or Michigan in the Big Ten. It would never happen to Oklahoma in the Big 12. It would never happen to any of those bell cow programs in the other Power 5 conferences. But, Larry Scott just, stuck the knife in USC's back, put the Trojans in position to fail. So here we are with Utah. And again, two-time defending champion. So you open the conference season with UCLA, and then you have to go to Research Stadium in Corvallis Friday night, short week, not after an off week. That's how you treat your faithful, loyal, true two-time defending champion, not bolting for another conference. That is absolutely appalling. I mean, at least, because you'll look at the schedule. Cal on October 14th, you could at least have, if you're going to make Utah play on a Friday night in Corvallis, do it before Cal. All right, do it in a way that you have a cushion preceding that Friday night game, but no. And so that just is another completely unforced error by the Pac-12. And I have to admit, the Pac-12 making Oregon and Phil Knight happy makes sense. The Pac-12 stabbing USC, that makes sense. The Pac-12 treating Utah like dirt, that does not make sense. I can't really figure out why the Utes were handed that particularly bad set of cards. It's a real stumper for me.
Yeah, well, I will say, as we back up on the schedule, the one thing I will credit Utah with right here, Utah is not necessarily known for making the most difficult non-conference schedules.
Yeah,
in the past, a lot of BYU thrown in there, and of course that's the Holy War, and that's a sacred rivalry there. But besides that, not much there. They of course went to Florida last year. They get the return trip, and they tacked on Baylor on the road as a back-to-back with Florida. Look at
That's
that.
amazing. That's amazing. Yes. And I think we need to point out that I don't know if it's official, but I'm pretty sure that the Florida game is going to be the Thursday, August 31st.
Okay,
That Utah will
nice.
want to give itself 2 extra days of recuperation time between the Florida and Baylor game. So, it says like or Thursday. I'm pretty sure it's going to wind up being Thursday. So precise, and it makes sense, right? If you're going to have Florida and Baylor back-to-back weeks, you do want to get yourself 2 extra days to kind of regather, regroup, take 3 days off and then get ready for Baylor. So very, very sure, maybe not 100% sure, but like 98.3% sure that Florida game is going to be Thursday, August 31st.
And for as bad as Utah's non-conference scheduling has been, Baylor has been maybe the biggest culprit in all of college football for scheduling nothing out of conference. And so kudos to Baylor. I know that they've scheduled BYU the last 2 years, and that's a big step up for them. And the likes of, Texas, San Antonio, Lamar, and Rice being their 3 non-conference games many years. So they are also, stepping it up by playing Utah there. So I like that. And to get back to your narrative down here about the Friday night game,
Mm.
there's a number of things that possibly could have been done. It's easy to to just look at one little slice and obviously not understanding what the impact would have been elsewhere in trying to make the puzzle fit. But I would think that it would be standard practice to not force a team to travel for a short week. It's one thing to have a short week, but have them be the recipient of the home game as the short week.
Completely agree. Like that is such a common sense thing that if you're going, and the flip side of it, Mark, is that if you're going to ask a team to play a road game on a Friday, with not having a full week, that you do it after an off week, because and this is the thing that the NFL is unwilling to do. Like if you have a Thursday game, it should be after an off week. But no, and that's the fact that the season is now, the NFL season is now 18 weeks. Like, why don't we make it 19 weeks and you build in off weeks before your Thursday games? So like you're getting another week of television inventory, but we can have off weeks for players. Like that would be an improvement in terms of player safety. You're having another game. Well, I mean, you're having another week, but you just build more. You give each team 2 off weeks, and every team that plays a Thursday game gets an off week. But no, the NFL is not willing to do that. Kind of a little bit of a tangent, but it just reinforces the point that you're making, that if you're asked to make certain concessions, you should get certain acknowledgments or certain allowances that even things out. And this is not it. This is not it, Pac-12.
And so if Utah can make it through this, well, they've got USC, Oregon, and Washington in 3 to 4 games, and 2 of those 3 are on the road. If they can make it through there, then they've got another light, soft landing. At Arizona could be a bit tricky. And then Colorado, of course, is that designated rivalry game at the end.
Yeah, so USC has a 4-5 gauntlet. Utah, not quite as bad, but almost a 3-4 gauntlet with USC, Oregon, Washington in a 4-week span.
Interesting stuff. We appreciate everybody being here at the Voice of College Football. Do us a big favor and hit the like button on the way out. And also keep in mind that we're going to be here each and every Monday night, 8 Pacific time. And what you can do is bring a few friends with you. Let's bulk up the crowd. Let's be strong throughout the off season. And again, we much appreciate it, but we would love for this show to grow and grow and grow and grow, because we want to continue to do it on a weekly basis. Matt's here from Trojans Wire. Otherwise, we don't have a show. So we are so appreciative of Matt for providing his time, but way beyond that, his insight and his knowledge. What's going on over there at Trojans Wire, Matt?
Well, in terms of what's going on at Trojans Wire, National Signing Day isn't what it used to be. It's really more the early signing period in December. That's really when you have the big influx of players. But like, if there's a notable development on this signing day, we'll cover it. But like, frankly, it's basketball season. So at our website, in terms of just our content menu there, we're going to cover basketball. And so for USC fans, people who love USC athletics, not just USC football. There might be some USC football fans outside the university in the same way that you have Alabama fans from New York or what have you. But like, for the USC diehards, USC Trojans are closing in. They're not a lock, but it's certainly going in the right direction. USC might have both the men's and women's basketball teams in the NCAA tournament for the first time since 1997, 26 years ago. So things are really cooking in basketball at USC, and we're covering both the men's and women's teams, both right now on a good trajectory for the NCAA tournament. Men's team just beat UCLA in a huge game, and the women's team just beat nationally ranked Colorado on the road. They're both inside the field right now. Women's team is in a better position than the men. I know this is the voice of college football, but you asked. That's what we're covering at Trojans Wire.
I will note that to me, Matt, and I'm sure I don't even need to explain, you're going to understand my statement here. I believe that the Big 12 schedule is going to be the most fascinating and intriguing of all the Power 5 schedules.
No question. No question. How does BYU get treated? How does Cincinnati get treated? How does UCF get treated? What's the travel situation going to be? Like, is UCF going to have to travel to remote Big 12 locations for consecutive road games, something like that? Yeah, that's going to be very spicy. And of course, that the Arizona schools, they're going to be interested in how that all shakes down. They're like, and I'm not predicting the Arizona schools are going to leave for the Big 12, but let's just briefly mention this point. We haven't gotten to this, but there's the overpayment scandal in the Pac-12 under Larry Scott's watch. That Comcast was overpaid, and the executives at the Pac-12 network didn't report it, didn't follow proper procedure and protocol. And now that money has to be paid back, so it's going to be taken out of all the revenue projections. So that's a really, really bad mess. So is that scandal going to carry some collateral damage? Is that going to cause any member school to say, F it, maybe we need to give a second thought to leaving for the Big 12? I'm not predicting it. I'm not saying it's likely, but who knows? Like, because you take a toxic event like that overpayment scandal and you throw it into this volatile cocktail of realignment and what should we do? What's best for our school? Where should our home be? Is this giving administrators at the Arizona schools or maybe even at Utah a second thought? Colorado as well? Is this giving the Four Corners schools reason to reconsider what they do? And like, is Brett Yormark, waiting at the door, seeing if he can poach two or maybe all four of those schools and give the death blow to the Pac-12, because of this scandal? Like, I wouldn't completely dismiss it as a possibility. Again, don't think it's likely, but can we completely rule it out in this modern age? Seeing what we've seen, knowing what we've known, I don't think we can. So just a little pinch of drama in the room because of that overpayment scandal with Comcast in the Pac-12.
So again, folks, if you're interested in our ACC schedule breakdown, we went live for about 2 hours tonight, so that's on all the ACC channels, but we're going to do the same tomorrow with the Big 12 schedule release coming out Tuesday at 2 Eastern. We'll let that marinate for about a half hour, wait for those schedules to post to various sites so we can post them, and we will chop it up with all of you and take your calls on the Big 12 schedule release, because again, I am fascinated and I am so happy, unless we have some kind of crazy last second deal between the Big 12 and the SEC, that Oklahoma and Texas will stay put and have to face, to some degree, the four new schools. And I just think, it will give us the opportunity as college football fans, if you're into intriguing, interesting matchups that we don't often get to see, whether Texas is going to have to travel to Orlando or Oklahoma to Cincinnati. All those will just be fascinating and create matchups that otherwise we're not going to see.
And the other part is, how many old Southwest Conference matchups are we going to have?
Yeah.
Like you got to have Texas against Houston, right?
Yes.
You got to have the Fred Akers Bill Yeoman reunion tour. Like, you got to get that out of this. I'm going to be very disappointed if we don't get Texas and Houston. Now, you can't play that game in the Astrodome, but you can at least get Texas versus Houston. The other point about all of this, is that TCU leaked its schedule tonight. Now, like, TCU posted its schedule, TCU bloggers posted it on Twitter and then took it down, but there are screen grabs out there. So I don't know if you caught that, Mark, but you can analyze, you can break down and study TCU's schedule and maybe read the tea leaves in terms of what that means for other Big 12 schedules. I don't know if you caught that, but if you haven't, I'm letting you know right now so that that'll help you with your advanced planning for tomorrow's show at the Voice of College Football.
I appreciate that. I did see that listed on somewhere on social media. Somebody was tweeting it or something, and I thought, oh my goodness, what happened here? But I didn't look into it because we were coming on here. So yes, our Big 12 schedule release. Join us on the main channel tomorrow at 2:30 Eastern, and then we've got Iowa and Nebraska shows coming up on Tuesday as well. Matt, we so much appreciate you making this happen. Otherwise, we don't have a USC show without Matt. So a lot of appreciation to Matt. Hope you guys out there realize what we get here with Matt each and every week. Bring some friends with you next week. We'll be back Monday at 8 Pacific time. All right, Matt. Have a great week. We appreciate you, and we'll catch everybody soon. Again, we've got 3 big shows coming up on Tuesday, and we will see you right here at the Voice of College Football.